the Froome subunitable case, the Jiffy bag, the sort of whole Freeman trial, it's all part of that narrative. It's all part of that sort of slow decline in it. I think an interest in the team itself and an interest in cycling from the public, and also just in the team's fortunes. The other thing that was happening through all of this was Dave Brailsford was at first just distracted and then basically pulled out of the team almost entirely, but not entirely, quite importantly. So let's talk about Dave Brailsford and kind of what he built first, and then why the way that he has exited the team, maybe exit isn't even really the right word, the way that he has stopped sort of day-to-day operations with the team has impacted their fortunes.
I don't think we need to speak for 15 minutes about how much of a genius Brailsford is, because he is, to be honest. I know he has his detractors, but what he's done for cycling with British Cycling First and then Ineos, it moved the sport on immensely. And it speaks volumes how many different people came to us and said, we miss Dave Brailsford. Like, they are crying out for him. They really, really
people from like inside the team, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Or recently inside the team.
Everyone is saying, we need Dave back. I've got news to them. Dave's not coming back. He's staying in Manchester. I'm sorry. But I think what I'd like to say in this is there's nothing wrong with Brailsford moving on. There's nothing wrong with him going to Man United and before that living in a caravan in Nice. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think the Ineos Sports Group having all these different sporting portfolios, even though they're not very successful yet, I think that actually has that offers a lot of good. And Ben Williams, who was the ex-performance coach at Ineos, he said the same thing to us as well. It has a lot of benefits. And for that same reason, which is not necessarily this question, this is why I don't think Ratcliffe will pull his money from cycling, because I think he likes to have lots of different sporting portfolios. But to go back to Brailsford, I think it's very clear that when he's left the cycling team, he didn't plan his successor, and that's on him. Barely anyone we've spoken to likes John Allard. I mean, one person said that he was a disaster, which I thought was quite harsh, but you said it, not me. But this is on Dave Brailsford. This is his baby. It's not Ratcliffe's baby. It's Brailsford's baby. And it's on him that he hasn't picked a good enough successor, and he's left the team in the lurch. For all that he's done good, he's failed here.
I think Rod Ellingworth, when he was brought back into the fold, when Brailsford probably knew that he wasn't able to commit to the team as he once did, is obviously a great move. Rod Ellingworth, very well-respected guy, very talented, has achieved a lot. But one thing that came through from the people we spoke to is that what they were clear about is that despite all of his positives, he wasn't Dave Brailsford, which is obviously a really tough thing to ask of anyone.
Yeah.
But so then that contributes in two ways, in terms of that Ellingworth will, to some extent, try and replicate both the results and the processes by which Dave Brailsford arrived at what they achieved. But at the same time, Brailsford will know and see that the continuation is not happening, and that Ellingworth isn't the guy to be able to do that, probably because there isn't someone there. And I think it's partly, my opinion, like from after everything we've heard, is that part of it is Brailsford not actually being able to find the person to replace him, and also probably not wanting to completely let go.
I think that
like we heard a lot, and we heard a lot of it about how Brailsford would still have sign off on loads of things, right? Ellingworth was day to day, but then he'd have to go to Brailsford and other, Ineos management to get things done, to replace vehicles at bike races, which shouldn't be something that's a problem, especially for a big money team. That should be sorted instantly.
Like but then we went from brand new Jags as follow cars and time trials to broken director sportif cars with no air conditioning within a couple of years.
And like stuff like Brailsford would turn around and at the last minute say that certain riders couldn't be signed after Ellingworth had already told them they'd be signed. And that was apparently the breaking point for Ellingworth. I think another part of it is that Brailsford and probably Ratcliffe as well underestimated the job they took on at Manchester United. I think football is just an entirely different beast, and within that, Manchester United is even bigger than that. And if we think there's problems at Ineos Grenadiers, the football journalists, and when they get to the bottom of what's going on and what has been going on at Manchester United, will make for an even more interesting story, because to some extent they probably don't have the bandwidth to focus on a team that's 14 times cheaper than Manchester United, and even many more times that less significant.
Yeah.
So it really does feel like a perfect storm, all of these things that have contributed to where they are now.
To take a quick step back, and again, for sort of just in case anyone out there is somewhat less initiated and what Brailsford did, like he was, as you said, Chris, he's a bit of a genius. Like he built some things that had never been built before. Sky was genuinely impressive. You can argue all day long about whether they stepped over some lines or whether there were gray areas that were utilized and things like that. But regardless, just basic, like the actual sort of marginal gains perspective on the sport was genuinely revolutionary when he started, right? You have to take yourself back to an age when a lot of teams were not paying attention to nutrition, when a lot of teams were not really coaching or training their riders particularly well, when most teams were not using altitude, when there was this sort of odd period in the post EPO era of cycling where, and I've had other riders tell me this, I've had riders tell me this that were part of the doping era. They said they used doping, cycling used doping as a crutch for so long because you didn't need to optimize yourself. You just needed more blood bags, right? You just needed more EPO vials. And so when that all started to end, and I'm not saying the sport is entirely clean, but we're in a very different place than we were in 2003, for example. When that all started to end, the sport didn't really know how to do these things. And that was the opportunity that Brailsford identified. That was the reason why Sky was so dominant for 5-6 years, really fundamentally. Again, you can argue about the specifics, you can argue about gray areas, but fundamentally, he identified the fact that this was a sport that was quite backwards, that had been reliant on illegal things for too long and didn't know how to do the basics properly. And so he was genuinely revolutionary from that perspective. I think that that's sort of important context for what we're talking about here, because then you get to kind of 2018-19. The Sky methods have now been in place for 5, 6, 7 years, and the rest of the sport is starting to catch up. And as the quote that you gave, Johnny, where they just had Sky had their heads down and they weren't paying attention to who was coming up behind them. That's a big part of it, right? Everyone else is now going to altitude. Everybody else is now eating more carbs or whatever the other things that they're doing. Hopefully not some of the questionable gray area stuff, but everyone's catching up, right? And then at the same time that everyone is catching up, Dave Brailsford is stepping away. And so you had this kind of perfect storm of what on earth is this team supposed to do? And the replacement, Ellingworth, or now Allert, were never actually given the ability or the power to completely reset and to figure out what the next marginal gains is, right? Was it Allard that said maximal gains? That's not going to do it, right? Like that's not. You have to genuinely identify a new opportunity in the sport and jump into it and execute, and that's how you get ahead. And I think that's what UAE and Visma and some of the other teams did. And to me, that opportunity was development teams and getting star athletes at 18 years old, right? That was the next thing that was going to put you ahead in pro cycling. And Sky didn't do it. Ineos didn't do it.
Go on, you go.
I think Ineos, Sky, Brailsford, it's all the same people, obviously. I think they've done something fundamentally wrong. But ultimately, they haven't trusted people to do the job. If you're going to make Ellingworth general manager, let him be the general manager. Like, don't have anyone else above him, because then you'll lose him. For what it's worth, I don't think that Rod was actually the right person for that job. I think he was better at actually bringing riders through.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. If my theory is correct, and that essentially development pathways have become the marginal gain,
he should have been given that opportunity. He should have been given that opportunity. Now hindsight's 2020, but like that I think it makes a ton of sense to do that. Well, it's a simple fit, isn't it?
Yeah. Because that's what Ellingworth was known for. I mean, Ellingworth was the guy who ran British cycling. He was the guy who ushered through Mark Cavendish and Wiggins and all these other riders. He's the guy that built that that built
Yeah.
British cycling into what it was, or helped build British cycling into what it was in the late 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 kind of era. And he was not given the same power at Ineos in 2019,